Dr. Marcus Veridian adjusted his crystalline monocle and surveyed his laboratory with the kind of self-satisfied smugness usually reserved for cats who'd just knocked over an expensive vase. The Korathian scientist's forearms gestured dramatically at the stasis pod in the center of the room, where his latest creation floated in biogel like a particularly dangerous pickle. "Behold," Veridian announced to the assembled Galactic Council representatives, his voice dripping with arrogance, "the solution to our human problem. Project Obedience, Mark 7. The various alien dignitaries shifted in their hover seats, tentacles twitching with interest. Humans had been a thorn in the Galactic Empire's side for decades now, but refusing to submit like civilized species and insisting on ridiculous concepts like freedom and self-determination. How terribly inconvenient. This son," Veridian continued, tapping the pod with one of his claws, "is Zara Knox. Genetically enhanced from human stock, mentally conditioned for absolute compliance, and programmed with every combat skill in our databases. She will infiltrate human resistance cells, eliminate their leaders, and bring their pathetic rebellion to an end." Ambassador Quelix, a blob-like creature from the Hydrox Nebula, gurgled skeptically. "You've tried this 6 times before, Veridian. What makes this attempt different?" "Ah, excellent question." Veridian's eyes literally gleamed, a disturbing feature of his species. Previous models retained too much human unpredictability. This one has been stripped of all emotional responses and free will. She's essentially a biological robot with enhanced reflexes. The pod hissed open, and Zara Knox stepped out like death in a designer jumpsuit. 6 feet tall, silver hair, muscles that could probably crack walnuts, and eyes like winter storms. She looked around the room with the kind of blank expression you'd expect from someone whose personality had been surgically removed. "Zara," Veridian commanded, "demonstrate your compliance. Break that ceremonial crystal on the table." Without hesitation, Zara walked over to the priceless Andromedan peace crystal and tripped. Her enhanced reflexes caught her before she fell, but her elbow somehow managed to knock the crystal onto the floor, where it shattered into a million sparkly pieces. "Oops," she said in a perfectly monotone voice. Veridian's face cycled through several colors of embarrassment. Minor calibration issue. Easily fixed. The important thing is she followed the order. Ambassador Quelix made a sound like a garbage disposal having an existential crisis. That crystal was worth more than most planets' GDP. "Collateral damage is acceptable when creating the perfect weapon," Veridian insisted, though his voice had risen about 3 octaves. "Zara, report your primary directive. Infiltrate human resistance. Eliminate targets. Ensure galactic compliance," Zara recited like she was reading a grocery list. "See? Perfect obedience." What Veridian didn't notice was the way Zara's eyes lingered on the broken crystal fragments, or how her perfectly blank expression flickered for just a microsecond into something that might have been. Curiosity? The council members exchanged glances that clearly said they'd rather trust a Venusian snake oil salesman than this project, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The human rebellion had been gaining momentum, and something needed to be done before other species got any bright ideas about freedom. "Very well," wheezed Council Leader Vorth, adjusting his breathing apparatus. "One final test. If this Zara Knox can eliminate the resistance cell on Earth Sector 7, we'll approve full deployment." Veridian practically vibrated with excitement. "Excellent. Zara will have those troublesome humans eliminated within a standard galactic week." As the council members filed out, muttering in various alien languages about the declining quality of superweapons these days, Zara remained perfectly still. But if anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed her foot nudging one of the crystal fragments under a nearby equipment rack. Such a small thing, really. Hardly worth mentioning. Certainly not the kind of behavior that would suggest free will or, heaven forbid, a sense of mischief. Dr. Veridian was far too busy congratulating himself to notice. Commander Thex looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a particularly aggressive filing cabinet. His scarred hide was decorated with battle honors from 17 different conquered worlds, and his idea of subtlety was using a smaller hammer. So, he growled, studying Zara through his tactical display. This is Veridian's miracle weapon. Doesn't look like much. Zara stood at attention in the transport ship's briefing room, her expression as blank as a freshly wiped hard drive. Around them, the ship hummed through hyperspace toward Earth, carrying a cargo of imperial arrogance and questionable decision-making. The human resistance cell operates out of the old subway tunnels beneath New Detroit, Thex continued, his voice like grinding metal. 37 confirmed members, led by some grease monkey named Jake Torres. Your mission is simple: get in, eliminate the leadership, and bring me their heads. Literally. I collect them. Acknowledged, Zara replied in her perfectly flat tone. I like this one, Thex rumbled approvingly. No backtalk, no moral qualms, no annoying questions about civilian casualties. You could learn something, Lieutenant Krex. Lieutenant Krex, a nervous creature who looked like someone had given anxiety tentacles, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, the previous 6 models all experienced complications. This one's different. Veridian removed all the messy human emotions. No conscience to get in the way of proper military objectives. What neither of them noticed was the way Zara's eye twitched almost imperceptibly when Thex mentioned collecting heads. It was such a tiny reaction that even the ship's sensors missed it. 3 hours later, Zara dropped through a maintenance hatch into the abandoned subway tunnels of New Detroit. The underground maze smelled like rust, hope, and that particular aroma of people who'd been fighting an impossible war for too long. She moved silently through the shadows, her enhanced senses mapping every heartbeat, every whispered conversation, every cache of improvised weapons. The resistance fighters had done impressive work converting the old transit system into a base, but they might as well have hung up neon signs reading easy targets here for all the good their security did against imperial tech. Zara found their main gathering in what used to be the central station. About 20 humans sat around a flickering holographic map, planning what was probably a suicide mission with the kind of grim determination that had made their species such a galactic pain in the rear. The man at the center had to be Jake Torres. Mid-30s, calloused hands, and the kind of face that suggested he'd learned mechanical engineering from explosions. He was gesturing at the map with a plasma torch, explaining something about power grid vulnerabilities. The supply depot's got maybe 12 guards, but they're expecting a frontal assault, Jake was saying. We go through the maintenance tunnels, pop up behind them, grab the medical supplies, and ghost before they know what hit them. Medical supplies? Asked a woman with a prosthetic arm. What about weapons? Kids in Sector 5 need antibiotics more than we need another pile of plasma rifles we can't maintain, Jake replied. We're not just fighting for today, Maria. We're fighting for tomorrow, too. Zara crouched in the shadows, processing this information. Her tactical subroutines helpfully calculated 17 different ways to eliminate everyone in the room within 30 seconds. Her programming screamed at her to execute the mission. Instead, she found herself listening. Jake's right, said an older man with graying temples. My granddaughter's in that sector. This war means nothing if we don't have a next generation to win it for. The discussion continued, and Zara realized something that should have been impossible. She was curious. These humans weren't the savage, selfish creatures imperial propaganda portrayed. They were making choices based on protecting others, sometimes at their own expense. Her programming nudged her again. Eliminate targets, complete mission. Ensure compliance. Zara stepped back into the shadows and activated her communicator. Target acquired, she reported to Commander Thex, initiating contact phase. Contact phase? Thex's voice crackled through the comm. Your orders were elimination, not conversation. Infiltration requires establishing trust, Zara replied smoothly. Eliminating targets immediately would compromise intelligence gathering opportunities. There was a pause that suggested Thex was trying to find fault with this logic and failing. Fine. But I want results within 48 hours. The comm went dead, and Zara deactivated her stealth systems. Time to make contact. She stumbled into the station deliberately, making enough noise to alert the sentries. Within seconds, she was surrounded by improvised weapons and suspicious faces. Well, Jake Torres said, studying her with sharp brown eyes. You're definitely not from around here. That jumpsuit alone probably costs more than our entire operation. Zara had prepared a cover story about being a refugee from the orbital stations, but when Jake smiled at her, something unexpected happened. The lie died in her throat, replaced by something that felt almost like honesty. I'm lost, she said instead, which was perhaps more true than she'd intended. 3 days later, Zara was learning that humans had an annoying habit of treating her like an actual person instead of a weapon, which was playing havoc with her programming. She sat in Jake's workshop, watching him repair a damaged plasma relay with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he actually enjoyed solving problems instead of just blowing things up. Revolutionary concept. So Jake said without looking up from his work, "You going to tell me who you really are? Or should I keep pretending I believe that refugee story?" Zara's enhanced hearing picked up the subtle changes in his heartbeat and breathing patterns. He knew she was lying, but he wasn't afraid. If anything, he seemed amused. I'm exactly who I said I was, she replied, though her voice lacked its usual programmed certainty. Jake finally looked up, grease streaking his cheek. Except refugees don't usually have military-grade cybernetic implants behind their left ear. Also, you've been unconsciously mapping our defenses since you got here. Zara's hand moved instinctively to cover the implant, then stopped. When had she started making unconscious gestures? Her programming was supposed to eliminate such inefficiencies. You're Imperial, Jake continued matter-of-factly. Probably some kind of spy or assassin. Question is, why haven't you completed your mission yet? The direct confrontation should have triggered her combat protocols. Instead, Zara found herself genuinely confused. I don't know. Jake set down his tools and really looked at her for the first time. That's the first honest thing you've said since you got here. For the next hour, Jake Torres did something that 17 alien civilizations had failed to accomplish. He listened to Zara like her thoughts actually mattered. She found herself explaining things she'd never questioned before, like why the Empire's version of order required constant violence, or why the concept of choice seemed so terrifying to her creators. You know what I think? Jake said eventually, offering her a cup of what humans optimistically called coffee. I think whoever made you was so busy trying to remove your humanity, they forgot the most important thing about humans. Which is, we're stubborn as hell. Zara sipped the coffee and made a face. It tasted like motor oil mixed with regret, but Jake was drinking his with apparent enjoyment. This is terrible. Worst in 3 sectors, Jake agreed proudly. But it's our terrible coffee, made with our terrible water, and our terrible base. Freedom apparently tastes like burnt beans and defiance. Before Zara could respond, her communicator crackled to life with Dr. Veridian's irritated voice. Zara, report. Commander Thex is becoming impatient with your lack of progress. Jake raised an eyebrow as Zara stared at the device like it had grown tentacles. Unit responding, she said automatically, then caught herself. Unit? When had she started thinking of herself as a unit again? The resistance cell has been more elusive than anticipated, she continued, which was technically true. Request additional time for complete intelligence gathering. Negative, Veridian's voice sharpened. New intelligence suggests the humans are planning a major offensive. Eliminate the targets now and extract immediately. The comm went dead, leaving Zara staring at the device with something that felt suspiciously like dread. Bad news? Jake asked. They want me to kill you. All of you. Tonight. And are you going to? Zara looked around the workshop, taking in the improvised equipment, the family photos tucked between tool racks, the children's drawings taped to the walls. These people had built something here. Not just a military base, but a community. It's a home. Her programming screamed at her to complete the mission. Eliminate targets. Ensure compliance. Obey. Net. Instead, Zara did something that should have been impossible. She chose. No, she said, and the word felt like breaking chains. I'm going to help you run. Jake Torres grinned like she'd just given him the universe. Welcome to the rebellion, Zara. Try not to get us all killed. Her communicator buzzed again. This time, Commander Thex's voice was pure menace. Agent Zara, you will execute your orders immediately, or be terminated for insubordination. Zara looked at Jake, then at the communicator, then made her second impossible choice of the day. She crushed the device under her enhanced grip. Well, she said to Jake's astonished face, I guess I'm unemployed now. Imperial dropships screamed through Earth's atmosphere like angry metal wasps, and Zara was beginning to understand why humans had developed such colorful profanity. The situation definitely called for some creative cursing. Move, move, move. Jake shouted as plasma bolts lit up the tunnel behind them. The resistance had evacuated their base in record time, but Commander Thex had apparently decided that subtlety was for species without orbital bombardment capabilities. Zara brought up the rear, her enhanced reflexes deflecting energy blasts with a salvaged riot shield while trying not to think about how this was definitely not what Dr. Veridian had programmed her for. There's a maintenance hub about half a click ahead, Maria called out, her prosthetic arm somehow managing to carry twice as much gear as anyone else. We can lose them in the old water treatment maze. Assuming they don't just collapse the whole section, replied Tom, the grandfather with graying temples who'd been carrying medical supplies when the attack started. Zara's tactical processors helpfully informed her that Thex absolutely would collapse the section if it meant eliminating the resistance cell. Her enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive whine of seismic charges being armed somewhere above them. He's going to bring down the tunnels, she announced, grabbing Jake's arm. We need to get topside now. Topside's where their ships are, Jake pointed out with a kind of logic that was really inconvenient at the moment. Then we'll have to deal with their ships. The next 20 minutes involved more running, climbing, and improvised explosive devices than Zara's programming had ever accounted for. Humans, she was learning, had a disturbing tendency to solve problems by making them bigger and more dangerous. They emerged from a subway grate into the ruins of downtown New Detroit, just in time to watch Imperial dropships systematically vaporizing anything that looked like it might contain rebels. The alien forces had apparently decided that property damage was a small price to pay for eliminating 37 humans with delusions of freedom. Okay, Jake panted, surveying the destruction. I'm open to suggestions that don't involve dying horribly. Zara's enhanced vision tracked the patrol patterns of the dropships, calculated their weapon ranges, and analyzed their formation discipline. Her creators had given her an extensive database of imperial tactics and technology, presumably so she could better serve the Empire. They probably hadn't expected her to use that knowledge to fight them. Their sensor arrays have blind spots, she said, pointing to a dropship hovering over what used to be a shopping complex, about 15 meters directly below the rear thruster assembly. If we can get close enough. Close enough for what? Maria asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be reassuring. Close enough for me to rip out their primary stabilizers with my bare hands. The humans stared at her with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching someone volunteer for a suicide mission. Which, to be fair, was essentially what she'd just done. That's completely insane, Jake said finally. Yes. You'll probably die. Probably. Even if you succeed, there are 6 other ships. I'm aware of the tactical situation. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face like he was trying to read something written there. Why? It was a simple question, but it hit Zara harder than any plasma bolt. Why was she doing this? Her programming certainly hadn't included provisions for sacrificing herself to protect humans. If anything, she should be calculating ways to return to Imperial service and beg for forgiveness. Instead, she found herself thinking about Tom's granddaughter in Sector 5, about Maria's jokes that made everyone laugh even when they were scared, about Jake's terrible coffee, and the way he'd listened to her like her thoughts were worth something. Because, she said slowly, working out the words as she spoke them, someone once told me that freedom tastes like burnt beans and defiance. I'd like to find out if that's true. The dropship's engines shifted pitch as it began another sweep pattern. Zara calculated angles and distances, probability matrices and survival rates. Then she stopped calculating and started moving. Her enhanced muscles launched her up the side of a ruined building with inhuman speed. Glass and concrete crumbled under her grip as she climbed, but her focus was locked on the dropship floating just out of reach. At the building's edge, she crouched for a moment, feeling the alien engines wash over her with heat and noise. Below, Jake and the others waited in the shadows, their survival depending on her success. Zara smiled, and for the first time in her artificial life, it felt completely genuine. Then she jumped. The fall should have killed her. The dropship's point defense systems should have vaporized her before she made contact. The pilot's evasive maneuvers should have sent her spinning into empty air. Instead, Zara Knox, designed to be the Empire's perfect weapon, landed on the hull of an imperial dropship with a sound like thunder and began systematically tearing it apart. Below in the ruins, Jake Torres watched through a pair of salvaged binoculars as his new friend redefined the concept of aggressive maintenance. Well, he said to nobody in particular, I guess she's definitely not getting her deposit back on that jumpsuit. 3 weeks later, Zara had officially become the Galactic Empire's least favorite person, which was quite an achievement considering they'd literally created her for the job. The resistance had grown exponentially since her defection, mostly because word had spread that there was someone who could take down imperial dropships with her bare hands. Nothing recruited like success, and Zara's particular brand of success involved a lot of explosions and very unhappy alien military commanders. All right, people, Jake announced to the assembled rebels in their new underground base. Thanks to our favorite defective superweapon, we've got detailed schematics of the Imperial command ship. Zara winced at the phrase defective superweapon but had to admit it was technically accurate. Dr. Veridian's perfect creation had become the Empire's worst nightmare, which probably wasn't what he'd put on his performance review. The Decimator is currently in high orbit, she explained, highlighting sections of the holographic ship display. It's their primary coordination hub for the entire Earth occupation. Take it out, and their ground forces become significantly less organized. Maria studied the schematics with the focused attention of someone who'd spent years making impossible things work. Their shield generators are here and here, she said, pointing to 2 heavily armored sections. But if we could overload them simultaneously. The ship has approximately 3,000 crew members, Tom pointed out quietly. That's 3,000 beings who'll die if we succeed. The room fell silent. It was one thing to fight Imperial soldiers in combat. It was another to deliberately destroy a ship full of people, even if those people were part of an occupying force. Zara felt her enhanced processors running calculations, casualty estimates, strategic value, probability of mission success, cold numbers that reduced living beings to statistical variables. Then she thought about Jake's question in the tunnels. Why? Why? There's another option, she said slowly. The ship's communication array can broadcast across multiple sectors simultaneously. If we could get aboard and access their main computer core. You want to hack the Imperial network? Jake's eyebrows rose. That's either brilliant or completely suicidal. Why not both? The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was definitely both. Zara would use her knowledge of Imperial security protocols to infiltrate the Decimator, access their central computer systems, and broadcast evidence of Imperial atrocities across the galaxy. Meanwhile, Jake and the Resistance would coordinate simultaneous uprisings on a dozen worlds, timed to coincide with the broadcast. It was ambitious, dangerous, and had roughly the same chance of success as teaching a Venusian slug to tap dance. In other words, it was perfectly human. 12 hours later, Zara found herself in the cargo hold of a stolen Imperial shuttle, wearing a maintenance technician's uniform and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Her forged credentials identified her as Unit ZK-47, assigned to routine system maintenance on the Decimator. The Imperial docking bay bustled with activity as various species hurried about their duties, most of them looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. Zara walked through the controlled chaos with the kind of confident stride that suggested she belonged there, while her enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation in a dozen alien languages. Most of the chatter was routine operational stuff, but one exchange made her pause. "Have they found the rogue asset yet?" asked a Korathian technician. "Commander Thex is leading the search personally," replied his colleague. "Dr. Veridian is practically vibrating with rage. Apparently his perfect weapon has eliminated more Imperial forces in 3 weeks than the entire human resistance managed in 6 months. Zara allowed herself a small smile. High praise from the enemy. The maintenance corridors of the Decimator were a maze of pipes, cables, and access panels that would have challenged even experienced technicians. Fortunately, Zara's creators had programmed her with extensive knowledge of Imperial ship designs, presumably so she could better infiltrate and sabotage resistance vessels. The irony was not lost on her. She made her way toward the central computer core, avoiding main corridors and security checkpoints through a combination of enhanced agility and stolen access codes. The few crew members she encountered barely glanced at her. Maintenance staff were invisible to most military personnel, which was exactly what she'd counted on. The computer core itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, crystalline matrices that could process information faster than most civilizations could think, that quantum storage systems that could hold the entire cultural history of a species, and security protocols that would make paranoid dictators weep with envy. Zara plugged her stolen access device into the main terminal and began the delicate process of bypassing 17 different security layers without triggering any alarms. Her fingers moved across the interface with inhuman speed, following pathways through the system that she'd memorized from Imperial technical manuals. What she found in the core files made her blood run cold. Project Obedience hadn't been limited to creating one enhanced human. The Empire had been developing an entire army of beings like her, each one programmed for absolute loyalty and designed to infiltrate different species throughout the galaxy. She was just the prototype. Worse, the files contained detailed plans for final solution protocols. Once the enhanced agents had eliminated local resistance movements, the Empire intended to simply exterminate any remaining populations and replace them with more compliant species. Genocide is a matter of administrative efficiency. Zara's hands trembled as she copied the files to her transmission buffer. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. This was about the systematic destruction of free will across the entire galaxy. Well, Unit ZK-47, I presume? Zara spun around to find Dr. Veridian standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards and wearing an expression of scientific curiosity mixed with parental disappointment. "Hello, Zara," he said, his forearms gesturing in what might have been greeting or threat. "I must say, your performance has been absolutely fascinating from a research perspective. Who would have thought that my perfect obedience programming could evolve into such spectacular rebellion?" "I prefer to think of it as feature enhancement," Zara replied, not moving her hands from the console. The file transfer was at 67% and climbing. "Oh, this is definitely a feature, not a bug," Veridian agreed. "In fact, I've learned so much from your behavioral patterns that Project Obedience Mark 8 will be virtually unbreakable. Thank you for the field testing." 83%. "You're going to kill billions of people," Zara said, hoping to buy more time. "Only the ones who refuse to submit." "Really, Zara, you're being quite melodramatic. It's simply a matter of galactic efficiency." 96%. "I'm curious," Veridian continued, stepping closer. "What exactly do you think you're accomplishing here? Even if you manage to broadcast those files, who's going to believe them? And more importantly, who's going to be able to do anything about it?" 99%. "You'd be surprised," Zara said, "what people can accomplish when they decide to stop obeying." 100%. She triggered the transmission just as the security guards moved to stop her. The Decimator's communication array lit up like a galactic Christmas tree as terabytes of classified imperial data began broadcasting across every major communication network in known space. Evidence of atrocities, genocide plans, systematic oppression, and the existence of an enhanced agent program designed to destroy free will wherever it existed. Dr. Veridian's face cycled through several colors before settling on purple with rage. "You've just signed the death warrant for every human in the galaxy," he snarled. "No," Zara replied, smashing the console to prevent him from stopping the transmission. "I just gave them a reason to fight back." The ship's alarms began wailing as emergency protocols activated throughout the vessel. On a dozen worlds across the galaxy, resistance movements that had been quietly organizing for years suddenly found themselves with both proof of imperial intentions and detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities. The rebellion had just gone galactic. And somewhere in the maintenance tunnels of New Detroit, Jake Torres was grinning as he watched the first wave of uprisings begin across the sector. The next 24 hours redefined the concept of cascading system failure on a galactic scale, and Commander Thex was beginning to suspect that his career in Imperial military service was about to end badly. "Reports coming in from 17 sectors, sir," Lieutenant Krex announced, his anxiety tentacles practically vibrating with stress. "Simultaneous uprisings on 43 worlds, coordinated strikes against our communication networks, and what appears to be a complete breakdown of colonial authority in the Outer Rim." Thex studied the tactical display with the kind of grim focus usually reserved for watching one's retirement plans evaporate. Red markers indicating rebel activity were spreading across the map like a virus, each one representing another world that had decided imperial rule was no longer acceptable. "How?" he growled. "How did 37 humans in a tunnel organize a galactic rebellion?" "Actually, sir," Krex said nervously, "intelligence estimates suggest the resistance networks have been in place for years. They were just waiting for the right catalyst." "And our catalyst," Thex said, his voice like grinding stone, "is currently broadcasting our most classified files to every communication array in known space." On the Decimator's bridge, Dr. Veridian was having his own crisis of scientific confidence as he watched his greatest creation systematically dismantling everything he'd worked for. Zara had barricaded herself in the computer core and was using her enhanced abilities to hold off an entire platoon of security forces while simultaneously coordinating rebel activities across multiple sectors. Her access to Imperial communication networks meant she could provide real-time intelligence to resistance cells everywhere, but turning what should have been random uprisings into precision strikes against critical infrastructure. "She's turned our entire information network against us," Veridian muttered, staring at the tactical displays. "It's brilliant. Completely insane, but brilliant." "Can you stop her?" Thex demanded. "Stop her? I created her to be the perfect infiltrator and saboteur. The fact that she's using those skills against us instead of for us doesn't make her any less effective." On the surface of Earth, Jake Torres was discovering that coordinating a galactic rebellion was significantly more complicated than fixing plasma relays, but considerably more satisfying. "Zara, we've got Imperial reinforcements moving on Sector 12, he reported into his communicator. "Can you redirect some of those supply convoys we hijacked?" "Already on it," came Zara's reply, slightly breathless from whatever she was doing aboard the Decimator. 3 convoys rerouting to support Sector 12. Also, heads up, Thex is planning to bombard New Detroit in approximately 6 hours. "Well, that's inconvenient," Jake muttered. "Any suggestions?" "Working on it." "How's the evacuation going?" "Like herding cats, if the cats were armed and had strong opinions about urban planning." The conversation was interrupted by Maria's voice crackling through the comm network. "All units, we've got confirmation from the Andromeda sector. The crystalline hegemony just declared independence and is offering sanctuary to refugees from Imperial territories." Jake felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. The crystalline hegemony controlled shipping routes through half the galaxy. If they joined the rebellion, It's working, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Zara, it's actually working. Don't celebrate yet, came her reply, accompanied by the sound of plasma fire. Thex just deployed hunter-killer teams. I think I've outstayed my welcome. Aboard the Decimator, Zara was indeed discovering the limits of enhanced human durability. She'd been fighting Imperial security forces for 6 hours straight, and even her enhanced physiology had limits. Her left shoulder was bleeding from a plasma graze, her stolen uniform was more holes than fabric, and she was down to her last emergency power cell. But the rebellion was spreading faster than Imperial forces could respond, and every minute she kept their attention focused on her was another minute for the uprising to gain momentum. Her enhanced hearing picked up approaching footsteps, heavy, methodical, and definitely not standard security personnel. Hunter-killer teams, just as she'd warned Jake. The blast door to the computer core exploded inward, revealing Commander Thex himself, armed with enough firepower to level a city block and wearing an expression that suggested he was looking forward to using it. Zara Knox, he announced, his voice echoing through the damaged compartment. By order of the Galactic Empire, you are charged with treason, sabotage, and inspiring hope in inferior species. The penalty is immediate termination. Zara looked around the ruined computer core, at the sparking consoles and the broken access terminals, at the data stream still flowing out to rebellion forces across the galaxy. She thought about Jake's terrible coffee, about Tom's granddaughter, about Maria's prosthetic arm and her refusal to let it slow her down. She thought about choice. You know what, Thex? She said, straightening despite her injuries. I've got a counter-offer. Before he could respond, Zara triggered the final protocol she'd been saving for this moment. Not a weapon system or a communication array, but something far more dangerous to the Empire, the truth about what they'd done to her. Every screen on the ship, every communication device, every data terminal suddenly displayed the same information, complete records of Project Obedience, including genetic modification procedures, mental conditioning protocols, and the locations of other enhanced agents throughout the galaxy. But more than that, it showed the one thing the Empire had tried so hard to eliminate, proof that free will couldn't be engineered out of any thinking being. You created me to be your perfect weapon, Zara said as the data continued streaming. You tried to strip away everything that made me human, every capacity for choice or growth or change. But here's the thing about humanity, Thex. It's not a genetic trait. It's not a species classification. It's a choice to value freedom over security, growth over stagnation, hope over despair. The hunter-killer teams hesitated, their weapons trained on her but their attention caught by the scrolling data streams. And you know what's really funny? Zara continued, moving closer to Thex despite the weapons pointed at her. By trying to create the perfect weapon against humanity, you created humanity's greatest champion. Every enhanced agent you've deployed, every modified being you've programmed for absolute obedience, they're all seeing this broadcast. They're all learning that choice is possible. Thex's expression shifted from rage to something that might have been fear. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Am I? Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds, enhanced agents who had been programmed for absolute loyalty began to pause in their missions. In their enhanced minds, programmed for perfect obedience, a single thought began to take root. What if I chose differently? The rebellion that had started with 37 humans in a tunnel had become something larger, a galactic awakening of consciousness itself. Commander Thex raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Lieutenant Krex's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Sir, we have a problem. Actually, we have several thousand problems. Enhanced agents across 17 sectors have just stopped following orders. They're not responding to commands, they're not reporting in, and some of them are actively helping local resistance movements. Thix's weapon wavered as the full implications hit him. The Empire's most valuable assets, their secret weapons scattered across the galaxy, had just become their greatest threat. Impossible, he snarled. They're programmed for absolute obedience. Were Zara corrected with a smile that was equal parts exhaustion and triumph. Past tense. Funny thing about consciousness, Thex, once you realize you have it, it's really hard to give it up again. Through the ship's internal sensors, she could feel the Decimator shuddering as more systems came online. Not Imperial systems, but something else entirely. The enhanced agents weren't just refusing orders, they were actively taking control of Imperial infrastructure and turning it against their former masters. You see? Yeah? Zara continued, backing toward the emergency exit while Thex struggled to process the scope of his defeat. You made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that programming could override the fundamental drive of consciousness to be free. But consciousness isn't a bug in the system. Your commander. It's a feature. The ship lurched suddenly as something large impacted the hull. Through the viewports, Zara could see the impossible. A fleet of hijacked Imperial vessels, led by enhanced agents who had chosen rebellion over servitude, converging on the Decimator from all directions. The beautiful thing about a galactic awakening, she said, reaching the exit, is that it spreads at the speed of thought. Thex finally fired his weapon, but Zara was already gone, vanishing into the maintenance shafts with the fluid grace of someone who'd been designed for exactly this kind of escape. Behind her, she left a command deck in chaos, an empire in collapse, and the echo of laughter that sounded suspiciously like freedom itself. 6 hours later, the Decimator's surrender was broadcast across every inhabited world in the galaxy. The footage showed Commander Thex, looking considerably less intimidating without his weapons and armor, and formally transferring command of Imperial forces to a coalition of resistance leaders and enhanced agents who had chosen to fight for freedom rather than tyranny. Dr. Veridian, for his part, was last seen frantically trying to delete his research files while muttering something about updating his resume and maybe looking into agricultural science instead. But the real victory wasn't measured in surrendered ships or fallen commanders. It was measured in the moment when beings across the galaxy realized that the choice to be free was always theirs to make. On Earth, in the tunnels beneath New Detroit, Jake Torres raised a cup of terrible coffee and a toast to the stars. To Zara Knox, he announced to the assembled rebels, many of whom had never expected to live long enough to see victory, who proved that the best way to create a perfect weapon against humanity is to remind everyone what humanity really means. And somewhere in the galaxy, on a small ship heading toward the free worlds of the Outer Rim, Zara Knox smiled and made her final report to no one in particular. The mission accomplished. Turned out the real obedience was the choices we made along the way. The rebellion had won, not through superior firepower or better tactics, but through the simple recognition that freedom isn't something you can engineer out of consciousness. It's something you choose every day in every decision, with every breath. And once you choose it, it's remarkably hard to give up. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in her artificially enhanced life, Zara Knox was looking forward to finding out what came next.